Hello, innovators. I'm Todd Wyant, and welcome to the Bridging the Gap podcast presented by GRAITEC Group. You're invited to join our conversation to model the future of construction innovation and the digital transformation adventure of this great industry. My guest today is Ken Driscol. Ken is a seasoned senior application engineer with over 20 years of expertise in the civil engineering and software industries. He's also my longtime colleague at Applied Software GRAITEC Group, where he specializes in the Autodesk AEC and BIM technology portfolio, offering implementation services, training, and support for civil engineering professionals. Welcome to the show, Ken.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
It's exciting always to talk to a fellow GRAITECer, and we've been colleagues now for over 10 years. It's crazy.
Long time. I'll be 20 years at Applied Software, so
that's amazing.
Yeah, it's a long time.
I'm just 10 years. I'm just a young little kid next to 20. That's awesome. So, Ken, I always like to start for the audience to kind of get a flavor of you and how you got into this industry to begin with. What led you into the world of AEC?
So long ago, I kind of started out on a survey crew with my brother-in-law, who was a civil engineering project manager, and I kind of started out in survey. So from survey, went to school for construction, civil engineering, and then some survey, and then did about 14 years of design and residential with commercial, underground utilities, and transportation. And then from that, transitioned to the training aspect in terms of the Autodesk product line. And from there, it's been 20 years and then still going.
Yeah. So lots of change over those
Definitely.
20 years.
Always transition anytime you think about software and in general, because it's always mobile and is always transitioning from year to year. So there'll always be transition in software.
Yeah. Any kind of big trend lines and waves of change that come to mind over the 20 years? It was like, yeah, this was a big defining moment.
Well, now that they're starting to get a lot of artificial intelligence into software, it just makes it more efficient and simpler for engineers to do their work. It allows them to not only dynamically think of things as they're working with the software, but also get the responses and results as they're thinking of those things. So inevitably, it works hand in hand like a Batman and Robin combination in terms of, team. So software and engineers. So it works out.
Yeah. Nice. I like the Batman illustration coming in. That's my favorite movie of all time, just as a random aside. The Dark Knight, obviously, because that's the best.
Yes. No, definitely.
Well, let's kind of zero in more on water, okay? All things water. So,
Okay.
To kind of paint the picture for us, what's the current state really of global water distribution? I know it's a big kind of topic there, but what are some of the challenges that are there for clean water?
So there's in terms of global water distribution, there's a couple of things. When you say that to the typical person wants. In fact, if you say that to a person and you have like a globe here, then they'll have an idea of how much water is on this earth. And if you think about it, fresh water is really an essential element in terms of sustainability. So if you start thinking about fresh water, then you say all this water on this earth, but all the water on this earth, 97% of it is salt water, which is unusual, for the general person. And then there's 3% that's kind of left. And let's say that 3%, you have 100% divided into that 3%. So you say 69% of that out of that 3% is it's in glaciers. And who's going around picking glaciers and creating water, right? Nobody from the public. So then that's 69%. And then 30% is underground water. And from that 30%, that's 99%. And then only 1% is available for drinking water.
1% of the 3%.
Yeah, there's out of the 3%. There's a scarcity in terms of water, globally.
Yeah. So are there other kind of misconceptions then that exist about the availability of water resources?
No, definitely. So, like from the Director of National Intelligence, they forecast that by the year 2050, there'll be maybe 8 billion people, and like half of those people on Earth won't have access to water, drinking water. And like 2.4 billion right now in urban areas face water scarcity right now. So there's a lot of misconceptions, but clearly there's a lot of challenges in terms of, you know, the United States and all these other countries and water professionals to kind of do some things. So
Yeah. So it obviously the need for water infrastructure is huge and critical. So you also have another problem coming in that our current infrastructure is old and it needs to be updated as well as building on new infrastructure. So how do you determine really where to start? It seems like a huge obstacle. How do you prioritize?
what you have to look at it in several elements. And the first thing is for sustainable water infrastructure, we have to start with distribution. And you just mentioned this idea of old pipes and things like that. So you start with from the ideal of water distribution with sanitary, stormwater management, and those type of industries in terms of how they have to optimize and enhance existing solutions. But clearly, most of the cities in terms of water infrastructure, they still have pipes that are 100 years old. So that would be the first element. The second is this idea of artificial intelligence in water management. And then it's kind of like four different tiers. You look at the old pipe water systems, drinking water, treatment of wastewater, and then optimize existing infrastructure. Because everywhere you go, they're putting up subdivisions and urban high rise and high density everywhere you go. And it's not all about building this ideal of green infrastructure, green roof, it's not about that, because the most cost effective, most efficient in terms of optimized infrastructure is not just going to last into the future. So those are the things that we have to do. And then everything is based upon the economic factor of sustainability.
Hmm.
So the idea that you can just say, okay, we're going to build, what about all the existing infrastructure? And then everything is a business, no matter what, which is, I always talk about this idea is feelings aren't facts, because you can feel this but those aren't facts. So over the next coming decades, we have to have a pattern of investment in terms of water, because there's an underinvestment right now, that goes on specifically in the United States, but clearly investment is vital to public infrastructure, economic, and clearly environmental health.
Yeah. So I want to pull on a thread that you just brought up there around the sustainability aspect of it. But when you have the old infrastructure, how does a decision maker that's looking at the situation, how do they decide whether it's worth it and more effective to just kind of work on and enhance what's already there versus essentially tearing it down and building something new? Strike that balance and no.
Well, most infrastructure is based upon reactive. So if pipes break, then they say we need to fix them. But they don't typically, public municipalities and government don't say, all right, that existing infrastructure or pipeline has been around for 75 years and we need to change it, which is ideally
Should they
not
shift more to that?
Yeah, because ideally what should happen is infrastructure needs to be built out regardless of its existing condition, specifically with old 100-year pipes, because it's inevitable that they are going to burst and become disabled. But the idea is not to just fix it when it breaks, but that's one of the problems, rather that's the old way of things, rather, you have to look at ensuring sustainability and ushering the new way of water solutions, which now you have artificial intelligence, you got engineering technology to unlock all these efficiencies, and then you got challenges of hydraulic water modeling. which is like the next topic to be able to talk about hydrological modeling. It's been around since the 1960s, but Army engineers, they created a program in, let me check my age, in 1995. It was called HECRAS. And basically it was a software that, simulation software that basically did computational fluid dynamics. And don't want to get deep in the woods, but significantly being able to handle hydraulics of water and flow through natural rivers and streams and channels, because clearly a lot of fresh water comes from those rivers, streams, and channels, but you still have to clean that because of the human factor. Let's put it that way.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. That was
Yeah.
nicely put. So I want to get into the future state of things in just a second. Before we go down that road, let's finish up on some of the sustainable aspect of it. What are some of the key elements required to achieve really truly sustainable water infrastructure? And then how do you balance that with the long-term goal of sustainability with also, as you mentioned, the short-term kind of economical and social challenges?
Yeah, so some of the key elements. So let's just look at this: piping water systems, drinking water treatment, treating wastewater, and then optimization of existing infrastructure. If water was the Defense Department, everything would be done. And as I mentioned earlier, it's like a business, because who invests in municipalities to fix infrastructure? Government gives out federal monies for municipalities and cities to be able to do certain things. And the top of the list is not water.
Yeah. Oh, it's hard because you don't see it, like
Yeah.
you want to spend the money of all the pretty stuff that you can see and just
No, definitely.
pipes. You're like,
that goes to the point of why we take it for granted, because we don't see it.
yeah.
It's
So
like
you don't notice it until it breaks and there's a problem. I think I was listening to a podcast and they were talking about how you don't really think about your elbow at all when it's functioning well. You only think about when it's hurting.
It hurts.
And then all you think about is your elbow. It's the same thing with pipes and stuff. You don't think about the pipes that are running underneath of you and the water infrastructure until it breaks and you have a big problem. And then that's all you're thinking about.
Yeah, as you're driving about a dilapidated building or a building that has collapsed, automatically you say, well, they need to rebuild that building.
Mm-hmm.
But you don't do it when buildings are standing straight up and all you say is build infrastructure. But if you've seen pipes all the time of water infrastructure bursting out of the ground, you would be like, they need to fix this.
Mm-hmm.
So I said, most of it is reactive to things, which is not good, because reactive comes 3:00 in the morning when everybody's asleep. And then when it's a problem, and all these things take time.
Yeah.
When you're reactive. But if you say, okay, based upon this quadrant in terms of the zone for the city, we're going to replace all these underground utilities in reference to water infrastructure. Then you get it done, and then you don't have to worry about it for the next 50 or 100 years, unless, that type of thing.
Right.
But because, especially the older cities like New York and things like that, they have combination sewers where you have waste and water storm going into the same sewer.
Mm-hmm.
So it's, and no sewer should be like that today in this age.
Mm-hmm.
You know. Yeah.
So let's start future casting here, okay? And bringing in the tech. So you mentioned AI a couple of times. How is AI kind of currently being used in water management, and what's the potential that it has to help bring more efficiency into the sector?
Well, I think AI can help revolutionize this idea with water, because right now the demand for this idea of severe flood risk. And one of the things that happens with consultants and all these standards and all these national standards is you have to design for like 100-year storm. But of course, you've seen over the last couple of years, we've had 500-year flood storms, which typically once in 100-year means once in 100 years. But that doesn't happen that way anymore, because, weather has changed, climate has changed, storms are getting more and more violent, longer storms. So that's where AI comes in. It's an invaluable support in terms of human skill and ingenuity, because now we have some of the tools that allow us to analyze and simulate what those things are without having to spend a lot of money for those type of simulations.
Mm-hmm.
So you have all these different agencies that are become better to achieve those outcomes in their projects. So you get fewer errors, you get speed, you get efficiency, which means now you get sustainable systems. Now they're safer, and you get cleaner water for communities all around the world.
What are some of the barriers then to really implementing AI solutions into water infrastructure?
Well, the one thing that people like, because it's easy to say AI, right? But AI is really about data. And if you don't have the data, then the AI really can't do anything. So it isn't, working with AI is like it's it's not like it's a pipe dream, because it's already making a great impact. Especially like probably 65% of design leaders agree that AI is essential for their work business. So 2 to 5 years from now, everything is going to have a part of AI in it, from automating and from repetitive tasks to optimizing, predicting maintenance. So right now, today, there's probably 30% of AI for workspace safety and risk analysis. And again, it's all about the data. It's all about the data.
You bring up an interesting point there with the how to really leverage your data to fuel AI.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that is always kind of makes me laugh is when people just collect data for the sake of collecting data, and then you're like, well, what do you want to use that data for? I don't know, but the data will tell me where to go.
Yes.
You have to really think through what you want to be looking at, or else the data is just going to totally overwhelm you. So how do you put the kind of maybe governance in place around data and create the vision of what you want to look at and the questions that you're wanting the data to provide answers to be able to really leverage AI successfully?
Well, you have to start with standards and regulations, and then you have to have software firms that have to develop these efficient plans, design, the ability to operate, and then maintain streamlined water systems. So, that not only lasts for 5 years, but stand the test of time for 20 years is the ideal of sustainability. And then you start thinking about that idea of data, and you start thinking about digital, you start thinking about cloud-based capabilities to allow consultants and engineers to kind of anywhere in the world collaborate. And then from collaboration, you have like this central hub that allows users to access, edit that data to its most up-to-date model version. And again, it's all about the data. It's like a cell phone. Everyone's walking around with a big computer in their small little hand. Everybody's walking around with it. And that's the ideal of data. Because everything you do, everything you know, everything your profile about you is in that little phone.
Right. Yeah.
And that's why
it would be bad to
important.
ever lose your phone.
Yes.
Yes. It would be
Definitely.
bad shape. So you brought up the kind of the tech providers. How should tech providers view their responsibility in supporting sustainable water management?
Well, again, you start having to think about investment, because consultants, no matter what they do, it's a business. So when you say tech providers, it's a business, and it's about, like I mentioned earlier, people don't invest in water infrastructure. They just don't. Billionaires don't invest in water infrastructure, and if they do, it's going to be the type of billionaire that has the resources to go up the glaciers, put the water in a bottle, and sell it. And that has nothing to do with infrastructure. It's about business and dollars. But again, cloud capabilities that are starting to help now. Now we can run even larger simulations. And there's large software companies out there allowing us to address those things.
Yeah. Nice. Kind of zero or flying out a bit, zooming out. That's the word I was looking for. How can companies really position themselves to stay ahead of the technology curve, the sustainability curve, the BIM adoption curve? How do they proactively take that stance to stay ahead of all the incoming trends?
Well, they have to do it through a combination of their own in-house built innovations. That's one. Like, for instance, Autodesk has this with info drainage, this AI powered machine deluge function that allows you to, do some serious flood modeling and simulations. And then you have to have strategic partners. So strategic partners like these other smaller software companies, solutions that perform cloud-based, or they have these cloud-based platforms that automate condition assessment, also automating assessments from CCTV footage, those type of things. That's how you can better help secure, collaboration in a combination of in-house built innovations. You get better water management. You get more resilient flood management. You get more efficient drainage design. And then you get low risk, high efficient treatment operations. And then they're cost effective. So the bottom line is greater consultant satisfaction, better emergency preparedness, and then also sustainable, efficient future for everybody.
Yeah. Nice. Pulling out your crystal ball here, what kind of technological advancements do you believe is going to have the most significant impact in the industry over, let's say, 10 years?
So technological advancement, it's kind of been started with the ideal. For instance, Autodesk, big software company, Esri, big software company. On the geographical side, Autodesk design company, AEC construction, all the different applications, but making products to allow you to upgrade and utilize existing assets more efficiently. At the same point, rising demands call for capacity expansion. So you got, again, these urban areas, and now you got areas outside of the urban areas. So all these wholly new infrastructure systems that you have. So Autodesk and Esri kind of are strategically tailoring their design networks for optimal and sustainable solutions for water distribution.
Trying to bring in that interoperability aspect of it between software
definitely,
providers.
Definitely. And, and again, I mentioned the idea of cloud-enabled platform. You can do that with GIS. You can do that with Autodesk. You can do that with Esri. And then you start to see what's scalable, And again, you still have to keep in the back of your mind, there's going to be this climate and population projections, just like here in Atlanta. When you figure 100,000 people a year move to Atlanta. 100,000.
It's a cool city.
You're like, where are they going? Where are they going? So, yeah.
Just the metro area is getting bigger and bigger, spreading out further out.
Yes, definitely. So, those are some of the type of things.
Yeah. Nice. Well, as we start to kind of wrap up the conversation, a couple of rapid fire questions for you. First, What does modeling the future, what does that mean and look like to you?
What that really means in terms of modeling the future, it goes back to software. All the consultants, because you could do these things by hand, it just takes a long time. But with the advances in the software, advances in the AI, now you have the ability to kind of simulate and get real-time projections, not only today, but weeks from now and a year from now. So those are some of the things that would benefit, and it's the whole ideal of sustainability.
Nice. What does innovation mean to you?
Innovation means all the open space, all the open space products out there. Autodesk, Esri, Bentley. This is good news for the future. When you start thinking about hydraulic modeling, you really need software to be able to do that, especially with flood and storm analysis. Clearly, I mentioned the idea that regulations have to be stricter. You have to have regulations and standards to create this more sustainable approach to anything that's being done, because ultimately we want it to be long-term in terms of the results.
Very nice. And how do people find out more information on what you got going on or connect with you?
Clearly I'm on LinkedIn, and of course, Applied Software. GRAITEC is another avenue of getting in contact with me, and LinkedIn, and then that type of, and of course, Bridging the Gap. We can always look to Bridging the Gap to find folks, right?
It's a good plug. I'll take it.
Yeah, the good news for the future is, saving water, in this aging infrastructure. It won't require a lot of guessing and digging the way we did it 20 years and 30 years ago. There's clients like Davison Water, who's a big water consultant that uses one of the products, InfoWater Pro, to minimize just leaks, to tell us where leaks are in an effort to clean their water distribution system. So that over a 10-year period, they've got over 46% more efficiency doing that. So it's just those type of things, but collectively together, that's where we have to start.
Very nice. Well, final question for you, Ken. If I could give you all power, you could snap your fingers and innovate one thing in the industry, what would you pick to innovate?
One thing in the industry, it would have to be AI based. And again, it's about data. But one of the things that most people take for granted is time, and things require time, because nothing is like a light switch. Nothing is like a light switch, because you just can't cut it on and cut it off because it's real.
Right. Be nice.
Yeah, no, definitely. But specifically things with AI, and because the more things become this idea of innovation with software and applications, the better consultants and individuals have to use in terms of their armory of tools to deal with these things that are coming, that we know of and things that we don't know.
Yeah. Nice. Well, Ken, thanks so much for taking the time and joining the show today. And for those that are just listening, you got to go at least see a snippet of the video, because Ken is the best dressed man in town. Always. It's always looking sharp and on point. So I love it. Thanks so much.